And we inherit these stories that the way that I am, the way that I feel, the way that I think is fundamentally wrong. And I have evidence for that because I've interacted with a number of people who told me I'm too much of X, too much of Y, and too much of Z. And part of emotional decluttering is learning to be present to your feelings with the spirit of non-judgmental compassion and to say, my feelings are not evidence that something is wrong with me. My feelings simply are.
Welcome to the Minimal Mom Podcast. TK Coleman is the Director of Entrepreneurial Education for the Foundation for Economic Education, FEE. His primary task is to explore various ways to popularize and promote entrepreneurial thinking to a new generation. He is also a co-host on the popular podcast, The Minimalist.
We did a live Q&A recently, and a gal asked, she said, I took a bunch of sentimental stuff to a donation center, and when I got back home, I nearly had a panic attack. I felt so much anxiety from it. And another gal chimed in and said, a similar thing happened. I got rid of a ton of my craft supplies, and I just felt so sad and depressed afterwards. And so you might be the man to help us unravel this a little bit. We like to think that if I'm doing these things that I believe are going to better my home and my future and letting go of this stuff, that I should feel good about it. Why might we be feeling some of this sadness and grief and even anxiety over letting stuff go?
Mm. I love to know how they feel now. I love to know
Mm.
how they felt an hour later or a day later, you know?
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Um, I can tell you this works both ways. This works in a variety of ways. Um, I think about I think about how for me, I had 2 trips to the emergency room within, like a 2-month period of time, because of, an intestinal obstruction. And long story made short, as a result of these issues, I had to make radical changes in my diet. And none of these changes were about aesthetics. None of these changes were about what's right and wrong. These changes were about here's the body that you're working with. Here's what your body can digest. And here's the
Mm.
best way for you to be kind to your body.
Yeah.
And some of that involves having to let go of some comfort foods that are very good at medicating, uh, or maybe we call it rewarding yourself. There are some comfort foods that are very delicious and very fun that are just no more for me. Not in moderation, it's just not worth the chance. And I remember um, shortly after that, one day I was sitting down eating a meal, and I had a meal that other people would look at and they would say, "Man, that guy eats clean. That's a respectable meal." And I was 100% on board with that decision. But as I'm looking at that plate, I just felt sadness.
Yeah.
I felt so sad
Yeah.
because I missed the ease and the convenience of what I could have had before that. I just felt sad. And I didn't condemn myself and I didn't condemn what was on the plate, but I sat with myself and I allowed myself to internally converse with that sadness, like
Yeah.
to be sympathetic towards myself. Like, hey, TK, I hear you, man. I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand, brother. Like, that's not easy what you're doing. That's not easy. Um, that kind of food, no matter what anybody else thinks, it gave you a lot of comfort. It's part of a lot of good memories for you. And it played a role in your life that was very valuable. And having to let something like that go isn't easy. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to grieve that. It's okay to have a hard time. Is there somebody who has a podcast that would probably say, "Hey, you shouldn't worry about it. You should just be motivated 100% of the—" Hey, that's great. And if you're hardwired that way, I hope a million people listen to you and their lives are better because of it. We don't
Yeah.
have to make fun of
Yeah.
that guy, but not everybody's wired that way, right?
Yeah.
And so the first thing I would say to anyone who feels that way is it's all right to grieve.
Mm.
We would never walk up to someone who just lost a loved one and say, "Hey, man, you're still crying? It's been 2 weeks since that person died.
Right. Right.
What's wrong with you?" We would never say that. We instantly understand that that's a horribly insensitive thing to say. But when it comes to the things that have played a huge role in our lives, I think there's room to understand and say, "Hey, I get it. That's hard. That's been a
Yeah.
part of your life for a long time. And
Yeah.
and it's not just the thing. It's you're letting go of some stories. This thing's made you feel a certain way, and it's upheld a story that matters to you. Now it might be time to witness that, to take a look at that story and find a way to preserve the essence of it, even in the absence of the thing. And so if we push ourselves to get over our grief too quickly,
Mhm.
we miss out on the opportunity to learn what that grief
Mhm.
is teaching us. And so I'm
Yeah.
not a big fan of rushing people to feel better, because if you're mad about something or if you're sad about something, look, we don't have an expiration date on this. And I know how to drag our bodies through a workday in spite of how we feel, but that's not what this is about. Like, maybe that has something to tell you that's important.
Yeah.
Maybe you got rid of the thing, but you feel sad because there's something else that you need to hang on to. And now
Yeah.
you have to develop a vocabulary for, how do I hang on to this when I don't have the thing that was my
Yeah.
permission slip?
Yeah.
Another thing I would say to people who feel that way is, if the feeling persists, it may be an opportunity to ask, am I letting this go because that's what the cry of my heart demands? Or am I letting this go because I think that's what I need to do in order to become a good minimalist?
Mm.
Sometimes we make changes because we feel a certain measure of pressure from other people's conception of what a good person would do or what a good minimalist would do. There are a lot of burdens we take upon ourselves because we don't believe it's possible to be a responsible adult unless we did that thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
For some people, it's being really busy. For some people, it's buying more stuff. So for some people, it's getting rid of stuff. I've seen men who are too afraid to be seen by other men in the passenger seat of a car while their wife is driving, because they've inherited a story that says something's wrong with me as a man. I'm being turned on by my wife. But man, if I'm tired and my wife is like, want me to drive? Yeah, I'll sit in that passenger seat. I don't have that story, right? And
Yeah.
so the number of stories we can have about what it means are so diverse, and there are so many freedoms we deny ourselves, and there are so many burdens that we take on because we're looking at other people and we're thinking, well, I have to do this in order to be seen as a good person, in order to be
Yeah.
seen as a responsible person, and so on. And I've seen a lot of people give up more than they need to give up, or I've seen people give up things faster than they need to give them up, because it feels like a moral obligation, something that they have to do. And I would say, if there's something that you're giving up, you have the permission to do that as slowly and incrementally as you need. And so if you have 100 things, maybe look at those 100 things. Maybe, for instance, your grandmother, who was very near and dear to you, left a box of stuff behind. And you know that you want to get rid of it, but at the same time, this stuff kind of means something to you. Well, maybe you can take a few items. Say, I'll take five. Okay. 5 things that are most important to me, and I'll keep those. And then I'll let the rest go. You don't have to let everything go. And maybe for the people that have already given away their things, if that feeling persists, then maybe there's room to say, all right, next time I can go a little bit slower, but maybe it's okay for me to replace 1 or 2 of those
Mhm.
things.
Yeah.
You know, by
Yeah.
but by listening to ourselves, we can better discern what we need to do. But we don't get there by doing things for other people, by following formulas, or by following the rules that other people impose on us.
Yeah, I think that's so good. I think that's one of the things I've really appreciated about you is that um, you are always reminding us that it's not one size fits all and it's not black and white. And despite your guys' aesthetic of black and white, but that so many of these things they do fall into a gray area, and it really is about us being on our own journey and not adopting everyone else's. And I know even when you guys announced that, like, oh, the minimalists are going off social media, I got many, emails and are like, "The minimalists are going off social media. Are you doing that?" And I'm like, no, I wasn't planning on it," you know? So, TK, would you be willing to tell the story of the cork from chapter 2 from your book? I highly recommend that everyone read your book, and we'll make sure there's a link, but it was so profound, and so would you be willing to share that with us?
Sure. So the idea of the cork floating in the water is a very old analogy, but I wanted to play around with the idea of making making the attempt to fix the problem, mechanically. So I'll just
Yes.
kind of give the analogy here. So you take a cork that's in the water, right? You would expect that cork to float because it's the nature of a cork to float in water. But suppose one day you saw a cork that was submerged in water and you thought to yourself, well, I got to fix this. And maybe you decided that you would design like some wings, or you would design an engine, and you would dive underneath the water, and you would try to attach it to the cork so that you can power this thing and get it to float. And if you're doing that, you're probably working really hard and unnecessarily so, because fixing the problem begins with recognizing that it is the nature of the cork to float. And if it's not floating, that means there's already something attached to it, or there's already something that has infiltrated it that is causing it to do what is contrary to its nature. And so what you want to do is you want to take the cork and you want to see, what can I remove from it? What is weighing it down? Is there something tied to this cork? Is there something that someone put in it? Is there something that someone did to it? And here's where you have addition by subtraction, right? And in many ways, I think that's true of our capacity for creativity and our capacity for peace. You look at little children and you can find out very quickly that no one needs to teach them how to be creative, right? Because they are just so wildly creative. I was sitting at dinner with a friend of mine, and his little boy was sitting at the table. And as we're having dinner, he says, "Dad, can I go for a flight?" And the father says, "What?" He says, "Can I go for a flight?" And none of us know what he's asking. And the dad just goes, yeah, sure. And the son says, "Thank you." And he goes, "Woo." And he does that in his seat for like a full minute. And then he stops and he's fully satisfied. That is the nature of a child. But at some point, we're in our 20s or 30s or 40s, we spend a lot of money on seminars, how to be creative. We got to read books on how to be creative. Why? What happens? Because over the course of childhood, we pick up a lot of stories, we pick up a lot of clutter, we pick up a lot of baggage about being creative, and we develop imposter syndrome in all sorts of ways. Why? Because we have little experiences. We crack a joke in school and everyone laughs, and someone says, "Don't you say that." And we go, "Oh, okay, that's probably bad for me to do that. I better be a little bit more careful." And some of that's good, of course, right? But then, we also learn that maybe our interests can be irritating to other people, or the things that are fascinating to us are boring to other people, and people make fun of us, and people look at us like we're weird. And then by the time we're 30 and 40 and so on, we're just really bottled up, and we're really closed, and we're really afraid. And we think someone needs to give us something in order for us to
Mm,
be creative. We think of
yeah,
creativity as this external thing that we need to somehow get inside of us. And it's no, no, we already have that. We
yeah,
just need to figure out what we need to let go of. And it's the same with peace. It's the same with joy. We know
yeah,
how to do it. We are
yeah,
it. We know how
yeah,
to be it because that's what it means to be it. But it's
yeah,
what is the baggage I picked up along the way that just disrupts and suppresses what I naturally am?
yeah. No, that's so good. I mean, when you wrote that, like, we are meant to be whole, like, our nature is to be whole and, like you said, to be at peace and joyful, that really struck me because I would imagine most of us listening right now are probably like, "Really? Are you sure? Because I feel so far from that right now."
Sure,
What do you
sure.
think is the correlation between both the maybe some of the lies or the beliefs we take on, but also our physical stuff too? I mean, is that equally weighing us down as much as the emotional things?
Sure. Well, there are a lot of examples in the world of how something that is natural can feel very unnatural if you have been bred on a diet of that which is artificial. You take, for instance, you take something like fruit, like an orange or a strawberry. These are very sweet, and if you bite into a piece like an orange or a strawberry, you'll taste that sweetness. But suppose you've never had that, and suppose you grew up in a home where you're able to have lots of soda and you have lots of candy bars. Well, by the time you first eat a piece of fruit, it might seem really dull to you. It might seem
Yeah.
like, oh, this isn't sweet at all, right? Because
Mhm.
maybe you've had so many artificial sweeteners, you've had so many hyper pleasures that something like that might really seem dull, right? Or, imagine that, you spend all your time scrolling and you're so accustomed to instant dopamine hits that require 20 seconds or less, and someone says, hey, let's sit down and learn how to play chess, and it's like, this is boring, it's boring and it's difficult,
Mhm.
this isn't worth the time. Hey, let's learn how to play the guitar, this is boring and difficult, I don't see how anybody has fun doing this. So there are many things that are fun and that are beautiful, but they feel like work, they feel like difficulty, and they feel like boredom when we have been conditioned to do something else or get
Sure.
those dopamine hits in an easier way. And so I think there are a lot of things like that. And so when I hear people say things like, oh boy, the ability to feel any kind of joy or feel any kind of peace is so far away, I understand that because we live in a world where we have been conditioned for so long with so many messages that tell us so many things that we're up against very powerful forces. And it's incredibly difficult nowadays to do that. So when you ask about some of the lies or some of the stories that we pick up that make it incredibly difficult, well, one of them is the fact that I feel this way is evidence that there's something wrong with me. Now, just think for a moment about external realities. If we took this attitude like towards the weather, right? You go out on a summer day, and no, how about this? How about you plan a picnic, right? And and you go outside and it rains, and well, that's frustrating. But no one says nature is evil. This just proves that
Yeah.
nature is bad. Nature really needs to get itself together. No, like nature just does that, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
nature rains, sometimes nature snows, sometimes the wind blows, and so on. And what we learn to do with nature, even though it sometimes disappoints us and it sometimes requires us to change our plans, we learn to work with nature. We learn to say, all right, when it's wintertime, I've got to do, like sledding or skiing. When it's summertime, that's when I do my picnics. And when it rains in a way that I couldn't have predicted, that's a day where I stay in the house and we cozy up or we get some work done or things like that. In a similar way, our feelings are kind of like the weather in a certain sort of way. It moves through cycles. We have days where it's just like the summer. It's all bright and sunny, and we didn't do anything to cause that. We have days where we wake up and we just, for whatever reason, don't feel super duper motivated. We've got days where we're just in a really sentimental place, and like anything can make you cry, and you're almost embarrassed by it. You're like, I don't even mean to cry. I swear, I'm not even sad, but like story. I saw that kid and I'm just crying. I don't even know why. This is just where I'm at today, right? And we've picked up so many stories about what this must say about you.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
what this must say about, oh, you're sad, you have no self-control. You're sad, you're way too sentimental. And some of these stories originate from the difficulties that we as people have in dealing with each other, and sometimes when we're different and your differences inconvenience me and my differences inconvenience you, we say things like, you joke around too much. What that really means is I don't find that to be funny, or I don't enjoy laughing as much as you do, or you're just too serious. And what that really means is I'm not as serious as you, or I'm not interested in this really serious thing that you're talking about, or and you just don't talk enough. What it really means is I wished you talked more. You talk too much. What it really means is I'm just not interested in what you're saying. And all of
Yeah.
those things are fine, but then we inherit these stories. Oh, I talk too much. I talk too, I'm too goofy. I'm too serious. I'm too this. I'm too that. And we inherit these stories that the way that I am, the way that I feel, the way that I think is fundamentally wrong. And I have evidence for that because I've interacted with a number of people who told me I'm too much of X, too much of Y, and too much of Z. And part of emotional decluttering is learning to be present to your feelings with the spirit of non-judgmental compassion, and to say, my feelings are not evidence that something is wrong with me. My feelings simply are. Now, I
Mm.
can be unethical or ethical in the way that I respond to those feelings.
Mm. Yeah,
There are
yeah,
ways of responding to my feeling of anger, my sensation of jealousy, my sensation of sadness, even my sensation of elation. There are ways to respond to these things that are healthy, and there are ways to respond to them that are unhealthy. If I win the lottery, I feel something, right? And I'm like, oh, I'm excited. But, I can respond to that by going to all of my friends and saying, haha, you guys who don't have anything, you're all losers. I never liked you anyway. It's like, well, that's not really the healthiest way to respond to that
right,
elation, right?
right.
So there's an unhealthy response to anything, but you can separate the response from the sensation and you can say, this is what I feel. I'm going to be present with this and I'm going to see what this feeling has to teach me. Maybe it teaches me something about my values. Maybe it teaches me something about my concerns and my priorities. Or maybe it simply teaches me something about the biochemistry of being a human.
Yeah. That's awesome and so validating too. I love that so much. Of the 3 minimalists, you're my favorite. Mostly I love your voice, but also you're very thoughtful. And TK, how long have you been a minimalist and when did you first really start noticing the emotional attachment that we have to things?
So I first met Josh and Ryan, what is now maybe like 7 or 8 years ago.
Okay.
And I did a guest spot on their podcast on education because at this time I was working on an apprenticeship program, and we hit it off so well. I really love those guys, and I think they love me too. And it was one of the first times where I went on an interview and I felt like I was just having a conversation with friends. It felt
Hmm.
like I was at home with family, and the cameras happened to be on. And so we decided to do it again, and then we did it again, and they were like, "We don't really have repeat guests, but, let's come on in." And I think eventually I think it was the common law marriages or something that say, "Look, you have this guy around for so long, you gotta give him a job." And so I think they're married to me now by common law, and they can't get rid of me.
That's
So I've
awesome.
been a part of the family ever since, and it's great because it's more than just fun conversation. There are so many ways in which being around Ryan and Josh, having lunch with them, having off-camera conversations with them, that's made me a better person. They've challenged me to the core to rethink many aspects of my everyday lifestyle that I took for granted, and I'm a healthier person because of them, and I'm striving to become even healthier because of those
Yeah.
guys. So
You wrote the book Emotional Clutter, and it's so enjoyable to read. You're very articulate, and it's just beautiful. So many of the lines, I'm like, "Oh, this is so good," and so well stated, and the connections you make, and so you talk about the emotional aspect of things being like the thing below the thing. Like, why do so many of us struggle with letting go of these physical items? From the outside, we're like, it's literally an inanimate object, right? It should have no control over me. But why? Why is it so hard to let some of these things go?
well, it starts with understanding why things matter. So, one of my favorite examples of this is when you go into a museum, you see all sorts of things, right? Things from places far away, things from time periods that are thousands of years ago. And what makes all of those things matter? Whether it's like a spoon or a flag or a vase or a pair of shoes, what makes those things matter? Why are they in a
Mhm.
museum? Well, they're
Yeah.
in a museum because of the people who did something special with those things, right? We say things like, oh, this is the first spoon that she ate with when she was a little baby. Isn't that amazing? And the spoon is interesting because the person who used that spoon was really interesting, right? Or this is the typewriter that Hemingway used. This is the pair of shoes that, Wilt Chamberlain wore, or something like
Yeah.
that. And so the reason that things matter is because people use things to connect with one another. They use things to solve problems for one another, to create value for one another. So the reason that things matter is because relationships matter, human interaction matters. And that means behind the stuff are stories that we tell ourselves about what it means to possess the stuff, what it means to pursue the stuff. So one of my favorite examples of this is a crazy example, but it's going to communicate the point. let's say you have a t-shirt from a friend and they bought it for you as a gift many years ago, and you cherish it. And one day you're doing a lot of decluttering and you're looking at that shirt and you say, I haven't worn that in years. I think maybe I should get rid of this thing. But then as you get ready to put it in the bin for giving it away, you say, oh, well, it kind of feels like I'm giving away my friend. It
Yeah.
kind of feels like I'm giving away the appreciation they have for me. I can't do that. I better hang on to it. Maybe I can try to wear it. Maybe I can find a new use for it. That's a very common problem, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Suppose your friend comes over and they say, oh, I see you still have that t-shirt, huh? And you go, yeah, I do. And yeah, I really appreciate the gift that you've given me. And they say, you know what? I never told you how I got that t-shirt. You see, I was on vacation, right? And I was at this auction and they were auctioning off clothes and items from this criminal that was arrested. These are all the things from their house. And I thought that shirt would look really good on you. And no one else wanted it because a criminal wore it. And so I decided to buy it. Now all of a sudden you're feeling kind of funny about the fact that your friend never told you this before, and so you might be a little irritated with them. In addition to that, what was 1 minute ago indispensable, just like that has become
Yeah.
reprehensible, right? And
Yeah.
and something that you couldn't let go of, now you can't get rid of it fast enough. Well, what changed? The T-shirt's still made out of the same
Yeah.
material. The
Right.
logo still looks the same. It still looks the same on you when you look in the mirror. What changed is the story behind the stuff. And that's an extreme example, but that's always the case with our stuff. Why is it that we feel so burdened by things? Why is it that we feel so preoccupied with things even when we don't possess them? By the way, that's one of the great misconceptions about minimalism, that minimalism is only for people who have lots of stuff. It's only for people like the Kardashians who have these really big closets, but people who don't have stuff are defined often by the pursuit of what they don't have or by a
Mm.
preoccupation with it. There are many people who don't have a relationship, but that's all they think about. That's all they
Yeah.
talk about. And they feel very sad that they're not in a relationship.
Yeah.
So you don't have to possess something in order to be deeply affected by your relationship with that thing. And so when you think about stuff, whether it's our possession of it or our pursuit of it, it's always the story that we're telling ourselves about the stuff or the stories that other people have imposed on us, the
Yeah.
stories that we've inherited
Yeah.
from our ancestors, the stories that we've internalized from the media messages that we get, stories about what it would mean to not have that, stories about what it would say about me if I ever lost that, stories about what it would mean for us if I were ever to give it away or if I were ever to buy a thing like that or be seen with a
Yeah.
thing like that. And
Yes.
so when I
Mhm.
work with people that are burdened by stuff, overwhelmed by it, the presence of it or the absence of it, I find that it's always the story. And when you unpack the story, you find that that's where the emotional clutter lies. And so for me, this is not a reframe of minimalism. This is an understanding of why it matters to the core. Because at the end of the day, we are human beings with hearts.
Yeah.
I think about this wonderful moment in Harry Potter where Harry says to Dumbledore, he goes, "Is this real or is it happening in my head?" And Dumbledore says, "It's happening in your head, but why would you think that's any less real?" And many of our stories, they're in our
Mm.
head or they're in our
Yeah.
heart, but that makes them more real in so many ways.
Yes.
That makes it more
Yeah.
real than the stuff because we can
Yeah.
get rid of stuff and still be hanging on to a story about it.
Yeah. That's so good, and I think that's so validating for many who feel like, "Well, I shouldn't be attached to this. I should be able to let things go more easily." And likely we've had people in our lives, whether it's well-meaning kids or spouses or relatives or friends that are like, "Oh, well, you should just let that old thing go, or you don't have to keep this stuff." And we're like, "But why?" And so I love that to us, it is very real, the attachment we have. So, TK, do you find that telling the stories that we need some kind of audience or someone that if we can articulate the stories, get them out, is that is that helpful? Does that then allow us to be able to let go of some of these things?
Well, it's a step in the process, right? Because when you don't see the story, it shows up simply as the way it is. Many things that appear to be non negotiable realities are really stories, but we're so wedded to them. We're so close to them There's no space between our own sense of identity and the story. And so the story just seems to be reality. In fact, when you think about a moment in your life where maybe you were going through some problem and you thought there was no way out, maybe you're angry with someone, or maybe you're disappointed, or you're frustrated with yourself, or you're hopeless, and you're talking with a friend, and maybe they help you recontextualize things in a way that sort of creates a breakthrough of insight. What usually happens in moments like that is they help us see that there's a narrative that we're telling about our life story, and that narrative isn't the only option. There's a different way that we can narrate the story. We can see that person maybe in another way. We can see our
Mm.
past maybe in another way. We can interpret our failures maybe in another way. And
Yeah.
that aha moment is when you realize, oh, this isn't a non-negotiable reality. This is one story among many. And if it's one story among many, the door of possibility is now open to where I can perhaps consider a different way of telling the story. And so you don't help people simply by telling them, hey, that's just the story you're telling. In fact, that
Yeah.
can come off as very condescending and very
Mhm.
insensitive, right?
Yes,
Um,
yes.
you have to respect one another's stories and appreciate one another's stories, and help people see that that story is in many ways an expression of their own freedom, an expression of their own creative potential, and help them to realize that their life is so much bigger than any particular story that they happen
Mm.
to be telling at
Wow.
a given moment. So
Yeah.
I think it's a major step in the process. There's still work
Yeah.
to do, but I think that's a major first step, because now when you separate yourself from the story, you can look at it, and that
Mm.
allows you to see it clearly.
Yeah. Well, so what's the next step then?
Sure. Yeah, so once you can look at it, that sort of creates kind of an option, right? Think about a time where maybe you're complaining about something, or you're expressing a frustration, and a friend says to you, "Oh, so basically you're saying no one ever likes you," and then you hear your
Uh-huh.
thought reflected back to you, and you think, "Okay, if I'm being honest, I guess I am kind of saying that," but now that you spell it out that way, I certainly don't wanna say that. I know that can't possibly be true, but yeah, it looks like that's what I am saying. Okay. And it's sort of like you have a moment where you look in the mirror and you say, "Oh, I didn't realize that that thing is on my shirt, and I can see it." And so now you can begin to ask yourself, "Well, what do I wanna do about that?" Because sometimes we see things that we didn't notice before, and we say, "You know, I actually do believe that. I actually do value that. And maybe all I need is to own it.
Hmm.
Maybe that is how I really feel, and I just need to own it and accept that that's all right, that that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some room for me to understand, why I've been so ashamed of that, and why that's so hard for me to admit to myself. So just because you see something doesn't mean you gotta get rid of it, or you gotta let it go. The thing to be released might be, a sense of, "It's wrong for me to feel that way." Or you can look at it and you can say, I don't really like that, and I would like to change that.
Hmm. Yeah.
What kind of perspective would I need to adopt? What kind of habits would I need to adopt? What sorts of changes would I be willing to make? What sort of cost am I willing to pay? What cost am I not willing to pay?
Yeah.
The thing about honesty is that even if our honesty leads us to the acknowledgement of something that is very ugly and very unpleasant, we're still better off. We're always better off when we're telling ourselves the truth, you know? The truth may hurt, but it also helps. And if the truth only hurts, that's the solution isn't to deny the truth or run away from it. The solution is to add more truth, right? Um,
Ah.
Truths like, hey, there's more to the story than
Yeah.
just the discomfort. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I really appreciate that a lot, and this has been so helpful, and, I just think so validating too, TK. So, thank you so much for hanging out with us today, and we'll definitely put links to all the places that, everyone can find you so they can spend more time with you too. But, do you have any parting thoughts or encouragement for anyone that's listening today?
Yeah, the social media stuff is a good example of how important it is to be in tune with the rhythms of your own life, and to know what constitutes your own highest excitement. We don't renounce social media. We don't have any opinions about people that are on it. And we have no commitment to stay off it forever. I think
Yeah.
there's a good chance that at the end of the year, we'll come back on it. But it's a combination of a personal challenge for us and a personal experiment for us. And that may not be right for everyone. And we're still discovering what this means for us. But I think what's most important, whenever we make changes to better ourselves, to move ourselves nearer to wholeness, to be gracious with ourselves and to be gracious with others. There are always people that are not ready to make the changes that we are making. And there are always people who don't need or want to make the changes that we are making. And that's okay too, because you get the most out of your path when you follow it in a way that isn't psychologically dependent on everyone else agreeing with you. You tend to represent what you believe and what you do the best when you can look other people in the eye and say, hey, here's what it does for me. Here's why I love it. And when someone says, I'm sorry, that's not for me, you can say, I totally get that. And I
Yeah.
still love you. And I still
Yeah.
love to grab coffee with you next week. Right.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, TK, and definitely we'll link to everything down below.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're looking for more support, be sure to check out The Minimal Mom on YouTube too. And we'll see you next time.